All right, welcome everyone. I am recording this meeting and we will post it to both the redistricting webpage and the library's YouTube page. So welcome. My name is Heather Heyer and I am a management analyst with the City of Rochester, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you today to present Redistricting 101, how redistricting maps are made and why it's important. So I'm going to get my presentation mode going here. Can everyone see my screen okay? Can I get a thumbs up from those of you on video? Thank you. Wonderful. All right. So let me go through a little bit of housekeeping here. Our agenda for today, there's going to be a lot of me talking, but I will ask that if you have a question to utilize the raise hand feature or type your question into your chat. And so I will call on you if you would like to ask your question verbally, or I will read your question and answer it as I'm going through these slides. But I do have a lot of information to cover, starting out with the important question, which is why is redistricting important? I'll go through some definitions and then just review Rochester and Minnesota census information. We'll look at the current ward maps, the redistricting requirements. I'll share with you our Rochester Interactive Map, talk just briefly about how maps are made, and then go into what to expect for the public comment period when we have draft maps available, and then as well as some additional resources. All right. Just want to make sure I have my chat feature open so I can see that in case there are questions. Okay, we'll get started. So again, thank you so much for being here. Why is redistricting important? It's extremely important because it really comes down to this principle of one person, one vote. It's ensuring that everyone has equal representation in our government. And this applies to all levels of government, from local to federal. So what does that mean for you as Rochester residents? This means redistricting maps and the redrawing of maps can impact who impacts you at Rochester City Council, Olmsted County Board of Commissioners, the Minnesota House of Representatives, Minnesota Senate, and the US House of Representatives. So speaking of all those processes, they are adjacent here in this timeline to give you a sense of where we are. So following the census, every 10 years, we're required to redraw electoral district boundaries to account for population shifts and growth to ensure equal representation. So starting out with the census, the first thing that kind of happens after that is the congressional reapportionment. And we heard, it was in March of this year, that Minnesota retained our 8 seats in Congress. So that was that piece of the redistricting process. And I will also say here, this is specific to Minnesota. It is different in every state. So I'm displaying Minnesota's process here. So after congressional reapportionment happened, then kicks off the state redistricting piece where they redraw both the congressional maps and the legislative maps for our Minnesota House and Senate. They have a deadline to complete that by February 15th, which is next week. Now, interestingly here, I have a little asterisk on that deadline because the legislature has failed to meet this deadline for the last 40 years, or the last 4 cycles of redistricting. And what has happened instead is that a special judicial panel appointed by the Minnesota Supreme Court has instead drawn the maps, the legislative and congressional maps for the state of Minnesota. So just know that that deadline is approaching next week. So we are waiting essentially for the judicial branch to release the maps next week, hopefully, fingers crossed. So I have this arrow very specifically pointed here because we're almost to the municipal or city redistricting process. And we have a deadline to complete that by March 29th. So it's a very short turnaround. And then the process, once the city is completed, then the county takes over and then they get to do the piece where they're redrawing the commissioner district boundaries. So let me back up a little bit, and I'm going to go through a couple of definitions with you all. So a lot of times we talk about wards and precincts, and I just want to be clear about what each of those things are. A precinct is a basic geographic area that is used for election, and it is truly a administrative function of elections. And a lot of times you most commonly hear this on election night when the reporting results, you know, there's 52 of 56 precincts reporting, for example. So that's kind of how we election wonky people are referring to election night results. So it's not, it is an administrative function, but it is also utilized by political parties for gathering information, organizing, and some outreach efforts as well. And then I'm just gonna click here. So on this map, these red circles just appeared to show you that the first number in this series is a 6, so that means it's Ward 6 and then Precinct 4. That's how we're organized in Rochester. And then I'm going to move into the next. So speaking of wards, Rochester is one of only about 70 cities in the state of Minnesota that elects our council members by ward. So that means it's a geographic specific area. In other words, most of the other the cities in the state of Minnesota don't elect them by ward, rather they're elected at large. So Rochester is unique in that matter. There's only about 70 cities that will be going through this process. And Rochester does only have 6 wards. Our 7th council member is elected at large and is known as the council president. All right. So Minnesota and Rochester by the numbers. Again, this information came out. It was considerably delayed, the 2020 census information, but we did get it this spring. We know that Rochester had about the 3rd fastest growth in the state of Minnesota, right behind Minneapolis and St. Paul. And our population now is 121,395. So it's a growth about 13.6%, which again is ahead of the curve in the state of Minnesota. What that means is when you take 121,305 and divide that by 6, that means our new ideal ward size for equal population is 20,233. I also do have a breakdown here for the rest of the information in Minnesota. So the state overall had a 7.6% growth between 2010 and 2020, for example. And you can see there the new congressional district size is about 713,000. The Senate size, Minnesota Senate size is 85,000, and then split that right into is how we do House districts here. So that ideal size is 42,000. All right, so speaking of those wards, here is our current ward map. And again, overall, we can see there was about 13.6% growth compared to 2010, but there were some wards that grew faster than others. And in the legend of this map here, you can see on the farthest right-hand side, there's a percent change for each of the wards. So we know that Ward 1 and Ward 3 had the fastest growth with 24.7 and 24.1%. Change since 2010, and I will actually go through each of these wards individually, so I will go through that here. And I see a question in the chat that I'll wait to answer until I get a little later in the presentation. So Ward 1 here is currently represented by Councilmember Patrick Keene. The population now is 22,017, so that's a growth of 24.7%. And you can see here, Ward 1 needs to reduce or subtract by around 1,700 to get closer to that ideal ward size. Ward 2 is currently represented by Councilmember Mark Bransford. There was a growth of 7.8%, and they need to gain or add about 900 rather in population. Ward 3 is currently represented by Councilmember Nick Campion, and the population is 22,051. That's a growth of 24.1%, and they need to reduce or subtract about 1,800 for the population. Rochester Ward 4 is currently represented by Councilmember Kelly Ray Kirkpatrick. The population is now 19,224 with a growth of 8.2% since 2010, and the ward size needs to gain about 1,000 residents. Ward 5 is currently represented by Councilmember Sean Palmer with a population of 19,779. That's a growth of 11.5%, and they need to gain about 454. And then Ward 6 is currently represented by Councilmember Molly Dennis with a population of 18,983 and need to gain about 1,200 people. All right, so now into the super fun redistricting requirements. So there's several levels of requirements that we're looking at here, and I'll start by talking about the federal and state requirements. So there is, of course, as I mentioned at the beginning, this equal in size requirement that is that we are trying to achieve here, and complying obviously as well with the 14th and 15th amendments as are noted in the second bullet point under the federal requirements. There are also are some state requirements of being convenient and contiguous, meaning that they're touching each other, and compact as possible. And Rochester's charter also requires that there are 6 wards, that they're compact contiguous territory and shall contain as nearly as practicable an equal population. Again, that's just reiterating some of those state and federal requirements. Also, wherever possible, ward boundary lines shall follow the center lines of streets, avenues, alleys, and boulevards, and shall run due east and west and north and south. Now, in December of this year, the Rochester City Council adopted a redistricting policy. There's a lot of text on this slide, but I will do my best to summarize it. The first point here being about trying to keep a community of interest together in one ward when possible. Now, a community of interest is essentially a group of people with a common set of concerns that may be affected by legislation. Examples include ethnic, racial, social, and economic groups. And our plan is to identify these communities of interest from you all who are participating here today, and through a public engagement process. So we'll continue to have some more meetings over the next couple of weeks as we ahead of doing our draft maps to get some more input from the community. The second bullet point here is essentially a least change policy is the plan. So the city will change the boundaries of the wards as little as possible in the interest of fairness and equity and the interest of continuity. And then finally here, the city will not draw wards based on the residence of incumbent office holders and will not consider past election results when drawing wards. So those are some additional requirements that we have in Rochester that we're looking at as we get ready to draw new boundary lines. And so that leads me to our interactive map, which I am going to click on and open here, because this is where I'm going to ask all of you for some input as well. So our interactive map is available through our redistricting webpage. Let me show you that as well. So right at the top here, we have a link to get it right to the redistricting interactive map. So I'm going to come back over here and show you this map. There is this top part, and as it loads, it might take a second. I'm going to just refresh the data. It allows you to select additional layers to see all the census information that's available to us. Of course, when it's prime time and I have to show you all, it's going to be slow. Okay, I'm going to scroll down for a second because the lower part is our community input map, which is where we would love to hear from all of you on specific areas that we should be considering as we get towards drawing maps. Let's just okay, I'm going to come to the questions and hope that this speeds up here for me so I can show you how this works a little bit more. So there's a question, it looks like from Ray. Has there been, or do you plan to have any conversation with council members prior to the release of new ward boundaries? So we did have a study session back in November where we discussed the redistricting policy and what that looked like. So that was kind of the beginning of that conversation. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, that works. So that has been the primary conversation that we've had with them so far. Ray, if you have any follow-up questions, go ahead and let me know in the chat there. And then it looks like Ray also is asking here, how do you reconcile the lease change policy with an increase in BIPOC residents? I think that's something that we take hand in hand, and we're looking for feedback from the community for is there a particular BIPOC community that is settled together in a space that we can take into consideration as we're redrawing a map, or is that BIPOC community spread out through a ward? So those are things that we're looking at, and I will go through here on this interactive map and go through the demographic layers so I can show you what I'm talking about a little bit. So I am going to zoom in a little so we can see this more clearly. The legend section of this map allows you to select several layers that you can view and see the population. So I'm going to start by going through the population change since let me see. I don't think that's the layer I want. I'm not seeing that layer right now. Okay, we'll go through the, so the way the census asked the question about demographics and race, you were allowed to select up to 6 races. So there is, the breakdown gets pretty interesting because there's several categories that you could fall in. So I'm going to use the percent white alone to try and display the diversity. So I clicked on this little caret following here so we can see what this legend means. So the percent white alone this is saying the darker the shade green, that means it's 80% higher or more. 80% or more is white alone in that area. Whereas if you get to the lighter shades, that means it's a smaller percentage of white alone. So in other words, saying there are people with more diversity in that area. So for example, we can kind of see, and we know this from lots of different maps, but the more diverse part of Rochester is up here. It looks like Ward 3, Precinct 4, Ward 6, Precinct 5. Those are some more diverse areas of Rochester. And then that holds true as you come down into the downtown area as well.
I'm not seeing any change in the map.
It is really difficult to see because the shades are very similar. Let me try and zoom in a little and see if that helps a little bit.
Yeah, I'm seeing your cursor move, but I wasn't seeing any changes on the map.
So do you see, I have right now Ward, let's select it by tract.
Yeah, I see the Northwest Ward.
Okay, so this Ward 3, P4 is kind of a lighter shade of green.
No, I can't see that.
So, I know, I apologize. There isn't a super great tool right now if we have color distinction issues. So my apologies for that. When you do, you can click on it though to see, this is selecting the entire tract, and it's telling you what percent alone is white, which is 53.7% white alone, if that's helpful.
Would you go outside of your slides and just go to this directly so it would fill the screen more, and then we may be able to see it? Or-
This is actually outside of, so I am on the web page itself. So this doesn't full screen, but let me see if I can. Yeah, I don't think it gives me.
Because the interactive map is such a small part of the whole slide.
Yeah, it's the web page itself, but I can try to zoom from here. Is that a little bit better
No,
for you?
not for
No.
me.
We do also have a video
Mhm.
that shows this detail that I will put in the chat here later on, so that you can play with this interactive map as well. So
Another suggestion is if you just on your slide, if you can just open it and slide it to be bigger, like on the corner. That's worked for me before when I've had links like this.
yeah, this one, unfortunately, there's no. I lose the legend when I. Yeah, thank you, Mary, for those suggestions.
Oh, you're welcome. I hope it helps.
Oh, you know what? Thank you to my colleagues at the library. I am not sharing the correct screen. So let's go ahead and fix that. Oh my goodness, you guys. 1 second. How about this beautiful map? Are you seeing? Thank you for your patience. And you probably are thinking this lady's crazy. Nothing is changing on the screen. Okay. How about that? Is this better?
Yeah, oh yeah, very much.
Okay, so I'm gonna backtrack for a second. My apologies. So here's the Redistricting Hub page. So what I just went to select was this percent white alone. I apologize. Here we go. Moving around a little bit more. Zooming in so you can see a little more closely. Is that better?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
good.
great. Thank you, Mary. Great, thank you, Stephen. All right, so like I mentioned, you can click on a parcel in this map as well to get more of those details. And if you select more than one, like if you wanted to, so this is telling us white alone, but you also wanted to know, okay, specifically how many people are Black or African American alone, you can select that. It gets harder to see the difference in shade because it goes by shade here as well. So that's where it's helpful to click. So you can see here that percent Black alone in this area is 23%. And then if you click on this caret, then you can get to the next one, which will also tell you then percent white alone is 53%, for example. So you can get to that level of detail in the interactive map. And you can turn off or on as many of the layers as you want. All right, so then I'm going to scroll down a little bit more because we also have, see, why is this not playing friendly with me? There is the opportunity at the lower portion of this page for you to leave a comment on the map as well. Let me see if I can get it to load. There we go.
Well, while we're waiting, Heather, is there a similar map for the state and federal districts?
That's a good question. I don't have a great answer for that. Because it's a bifurcated process at this point, the state House and the state Senate both have their own web pages where they're showing their proposed maps and whatnot right now. And then the judicial branch also has their own. So I don't necessarily know of a great one for the state maps to look at this.
If you look on the court hearings map, you will find a map from the Senate or from the Republicans, one from the Democrats, one from the essentially the BIPOC community, and one from a public interest group which involves the League of Women Voters. So there are those 4 maps that have been submitted by the court redistricting group, those 5 judges who will probably write the map, and that gives you a tremendous amount of information.
Thank you, Ray. Yes, can you see, I did just pull up this Minnesota Judicial Branch page. Can you see that on? Okay, so this is, I'll just pop this into the chat right now for all of you as well. If you come here to the parties' proposed redistricting plans, there are 4 different plans listed here, and there's a lot going on, but they do have the congressional state map, for example, and they're all kind of labeled differently, but there's a lot in there that you can see. And so the likely situation here is the judicial branch will adopt in whole or in part some version of one of these maps, right? Ray, is that?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay.
In particular, they have issued a rule which requires their taking into consideration a lot of the BIPOC situations that have been created by the growth of our minority population. So it's interesting to look at these maps, and you can look very high level or really dig into them, because they have a lot of information on what the percentage of Democrats, Republicans, et cetera, will be in each of these proposed districts.
Yeah, there are certainly more requirements that they look at the state level in that regard. And that is a little bit has to do with the case law, I guess you could say, the history of Minnesota and how they've drawn these maps. They're at the state level, they've considered competitiveness a factor. So that's where they take in some of that historical election information. You won't see that with the Rochester piece, though, because we specifically say in our policy that we won't take into consideration previous electoral information. So this map is having trouble loading right now, but it is very similar to the above map, and I am gonna actually go back to my presentation and keep talking and see if I can get this to load so I can show you what it looks like to add a comment on the map. So give me 1 second so I can share my other screen. Okay. Okay. So here we are. How are maps made? This isn't very much simplified view, but it is really comes down to some basic things here, which is we take into consideration all of the federal, state, and local requirements, community feedback, And then we have our draft maps. That sounds really simple. And in many ways it is simple. So in Rochester, what we're using is our ArcGIS. So that's the software we use for geospatial mapping. And they have a tool in there specifically called redistricting, and that gives us all of the population information by ward and precinct, so we can adjust the map and the boundaries to make the population more equal by ward. So that's what this comes down to, is we take all the community feedback that we have, and I will just use this as an example because I spoke to this neighborhood association a couple weeks ago. But for example, Slatterly Park, they are comprised over 2 precincts in Ward 4, and they consider themselves, they would like to stay together in one ward rather than get split apart, because we know that Ward 4 needs to gain population, but how we look at that and how we adjust that map, that corner of Slatterly Park could be affected. And so we take that feedback and say, okay, Slatterly Park wants to stay together and be in one ward. So that is something we take into consideration as we're drawing the map. And same thing, if there are other communities of interest, including BIPOC, that we should be considering like that. That's information we're looking for from all of you as well. All right. So that brings me back to this point, which public comments on draft maps. So we, our policy requires to have a minimum of 2 public comment meetings to review the draft maps. Because we are waiting to hear back on when we get the final maps next week, hopefully very soon. We're waiting to publicize what those dates and times are, but it will be more like 6 public meetings. There, hopefully we'll be able to have some in person, but we don't know for sure about that yet. We will also have physical maps on display at City Hall, Rochester Public Library, and 125 Live. And then once we gather all the information from those draft maps, we will review all the comments and consider changes to the maps. And then we will have a final map that we will submit to City Council for approval prior to the March 29th deadline. And I think I have a follow-up question from Ray to respond to here. So Ray's follow-up question was, will the council have approval of the 3 maps prior to the public seeing them? And no, they will not. We will be drawing draft maps independently. Our redistricting team will, and then we'll have our public comment meetings, and then we will present a final map to council. Does that answer your question there, Ray?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so let me see if I can. Yes. Okay, I'm gonna go back because my map finally popped up. So I'm gonna share my other screen with you again. Hang on. All right. So do you all see the redistricting community map input map here on your screen now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So this is where we want to hear from you, and there's the opportunity for you to come in here. You can search for an address, for example. Let me see, Olmsted Government Center. See if it'll pull up. Oh, of course, it goes to the wrong state. Okay, that's not what we wanted. I'm just gonna use the address for City Hall. So I put in City Hall's address, and you can see there's a little red dot on here. So you can zoom closer to that dot, and you can look around. So I'm gonna close that out now. And there are this is the legend. So it's telling you there are a handful of comments already on here, and they're signified by this blue icon. There are also polling places are identified here by this small gray flag, and then you can see what the current ward boundaries are. So we can see here there's a public comment here that says Ward 2, Precinct 1 should be expanded to the north to cover the whole of Kutzke Park and Cascade Creek Park rather than cutting them in half. That way a single representative can speak for those living in and around the park and the parks themselves. Going to Civic Center Drive would make a uniform boundary. That's a super helpful comment. And so what I did there, so I had clicked on this blue icon to see that comment specifically, but I can see all of the comments here. And there are other great notes in here too, that the lightest touch of the map zooms, and before you know it, you moved. And that's a very fair point. This is very, like if you're using the, what do you call this? The roller bar on your mouse. Do be careful with it. Sometimes it may be easier to zoom in and out using the plus or minus icon, because you can go a little fast if you're using the roller bar on your mouse. But I'm going to zoom out for a second so we can see there are a handful of comments on the map and throughout here. And again, you can change how you're looking at this as well. You can include some more streets if you want to see street names, etc., or some topography features. So there's lots of different ways you can view the base map, and that is clicking on that lower icon, but the legend here as well. And if you are looking to, so that, there we go. Add a comment. I just had to scroll down slightly. You can select there, and I will make sure that it gets fixed so that you can all add comments to the map. It says right now the comment period is closed, but it is not. We'll make sure that gets opened, and I'm writing myself a note right now. All right. Okay. Any other questions on this map? So this will be similar. There will be similar opportunities when we have draft maps. We will have them displayed on this page as well. And there will be opportunities for you to leave comments on draft maps as those become available in the next couple of weeks. Any other questions on that? And I can go back to.
Will there be an opportunity for a live interaction about the maps and for comments, so that, say, a group of people that all feel, so that you know how many people share that opinion, and that they can together kind of sort out a possible solution that works for them to give to you?
I imagine the public comment meetings will be very similar to this.
Okay.
So yes, yep, certainly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
One question I had when you went to City Hall, there was a precinct that had 3 different sides of it that were different colors. And so I wasn't sure which ward it was in, but
Yes, I can go back there 1 second.
right there, it's got blue, yellow, and okay. So it's a yellow.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah,
Yep.
it's got blue, yellow, and pink around it, so I wasn't sure.
Yes, it's the epicenter, really. All right, thank you, Mary. I'm gonna go back over to my PowerPoint. All right. So additionally, I did want to share, we do have a handful of additional resources. We have created the redistricting toolkit. There is a paper version that is available for pickup at the Government Center, at the first floor information desk, as well as the Rochester Public Library. The county also has the, so this was in conjunction with the county that we did these redistricting toolkits. It is essentially a compilation of all the information that you kind of just saw in that interactive map, with an opportunity to answer some survey questions as well to give us feedback. And the county has those toolkits available at the cities throughout the county as well, and it's available on their website. They list out all the town halls that they're available to be picked up. And then we have the digital version of our toolkit available for download as well. It's a PDF document. It has a handful of pages. So if you are more pen to paper person and want to like draw a map, you can do that as well, and then drop that back off at City Hall, or mail it back to us, and we'll review all those paper comments that are received as well. And then also, if you have additional questions, or want this presentation at your organization, I'm happy to do that as well. So I have my contact information up on the screen here. And it's here as well. So I am open if there are any other questions that people would like me to go over.
Yeah, I have a question about the ideal ward size. Is there an idea? It's the Rochester population divided by 6.
Yes.
But then is there an ideal precinct size that you try to get to? And I know the least changes is a big issue, but how sometimes, I mean, there's just been a lot of change in certain areas as far as who lives there, but also the number of people. Are you going to make, like when you change, add this number to each ward, are you going to be enlarging area just for people? I guess I'm not asking this question very well, but it just seems like you wouldn't want a precinct to be too large, or else it would be for voting there, just a lot more people and take a lot more time as an election judge to get all that stuff together and submitted.
Yes, great question, Mary. So there isn't a requirement for the size of a population for a precinct, but the state does recommend you try to keep it around 1,500. They find that tends to be the most manageable number, to try to keep it in that range. So what that does also mean, since we have seen a growth in every single ward, that every single ward will likely also gain one more precinct. So that's a very good question. And I do actually want to show, I do have one more map I wanted to share with you that shows the density of where the population changes have been by precinct. And I'm just trying to pull it up on my browser, and then I will share that screen with you as well. Let's switch my screen now. Okay. So do you see the Rochester Redistricting webpage on your screens now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So I'm scrolling down to maps, and there's some hyperlinks right here, and this leads you to a PDF of, I'm just going to open this one. This is probably the most illustrative of what I'm talking about. How much change has happened by precinct since 2010. So the green colors here, and the darker green it gets to blue, are higher change, and then the orange means they lost population. They got slightly smaller. So this is kind of what we know, that there has been a lot of growth in the northwest corner of Rochester. So we see that here, Ward 3, Precinct 7 is a darker color green. We can come down to our map over here as well and see that that ward and precinct grew by 60%. So that was significant. Ward 1, Precinct 10 is showing the biggest change here, and that's a 300% change. And I'm gonna, percents sometimes are interesting because that percent was very small, or the actual number was small in 2010, and I'm going to show you that. So I went to the 2010 map. We're looking at Ward 1, Precinct 10. So the population in 2010 was 439. And then I'm going to go to the 2020 map. And we can see Ward 1, Precinct 10 now has 1,753. So we know that there has been some development down on this part of town as well. And that's probably like 1 or 2 large apartment complexes, for example, that may be the cause of that change specifically. So I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to zoom out a bit so we can try and see the entire map.
Since Ward 1 grew over 20% and it has 12 precincts in it, will you just be taking some of those like precincts and putting them into an adjacent ward rather than draw new lines specifically if the lines are already good?
That is one way we could do it. I think when let me see if I can get down to that level of detail on this map. Are you seeing the interactive map again now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So yeah, we will look at, there are census tracts in here that are a smaller unit that we have population data for. So we will take those into consideration. And I don't know what the total numbers are for Ward 1 Precinct 6, but there might be a couple of census tracts. So we'll look at it that way and then make sure we're following the northwest, east, south as much as possible and follow that. So yes, this line could just simply move down, but we'll focus mostly on getting our ward numbers as equal as possible first, and then we'll go through and add those precinct layers afterwards.
Yeah, Bill has a question. He's had his hand up for a while.
Oh, wonderful. Sorry, I can't see that, Bill.
Okay.
Bill, go ahead.
Is there a certain variation allowed for the ideal size of districts, 1 or 2%, or is there some limit on that?
That's a great question. Thank you, Bill. The state level does usually require a certain percent. There isn't a requirement at the local level for what percent change. But if I come back to the map page, you can see this isn't super clear, but the 2010 population, every ward was around 17,600 to 17,900. So plus or minus 200 to 300 people per ward, if that's helpful. So we'd aim to be in that range again.
And will the ward lines say there's a state senate or a house district map that goes through Rochester like it has? Will you try to keep your ward boundaries similar to those?
There is not a requirement for that. The requirement is actually at the precinct level. So there could be, I'm just going to pick on Ward 1 because it's the biggest one on the map that I have on the screen right now. So let's say there was a House district or Senate district that split this in half. That's fine, so long as we adhere to that boundary line as a precinct line. So we just can't split a precinct in half.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, Mary asked a very interesting question because obviously you get the maps from the state at the last possible moment, and then you have to include them in your considerations.
Yeah, and which is really why we haven't started drawing any of these maps yet, because it could all be for naught. The hopefully that won't be the case. The judicial branch kind of also has they tend to be on the more least change side of the maps as well. So I'm not anticipating super drastic changes, but it's 2022. What do we know? To expect the unexpected, right?
Well, the judicial, I went to one of the judiciary hearings and the community input, and for CD1, there could be the change just to southeastern Minnesota rather than all along the southern border, because it was just in southeastern Minnesota before 2000. And so the judiciary has made pretty big changes in the past, in my opinion.
This is true. Yeah, I am right there with you guys. I am waiting with bated breath for these maps. And then we'll be in this really intensive period where we start drawing the new lines for Rochester.
Is there an issue for you, because the county only has about 3 weeks, 3+ weeks after your maps are finalized for them to get their maps finished? How are they going to be dealing with this? Are they going to have this kind of a session and then draw their maps and all this kind of thing all after you're completely done?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be intense. It will be very intense.
And we met Ben Griffith at a League of Women Voters talk, and he's drawing the maps for the county. Do you have a specific like demographer or something that's drawing your maps? Or are you drawing them?
Yeah, it's me, and I'm working with some people on our GIS team within Public Works. And then we will share our information with the county as well. Since they have done this, they have Ben Griffith has done this several times, and Jan Chesak at the county has done it several times. So we will get them looped in and make sure they have once we have approved maps, that they have them as quickly as possible so they can get started on their process. But they of course have to wait for everything to shake out. So it's interesting because they're distinct and separate processes, but they're very related.
Especially the congressional maps and the state, the court, those 4 different maps that you showed earlier, that on the state level, that they are so different. They separate up Rochester and Olmsted County very differently. So yeah, there's anything could happen.
Yes, I agree. I have truly stopped trying to predict anything.
I can imagine why.
Some of you may know I've presented at a couple other events. So I'm a previous election administrator. I was the voter services manager for the city and county of Denver, Colorado for several years. And I learned very early on to stop predicting anything because the unexpected will always occur. We have about 5 minutes left in our session. I'm happy to keep answering any questions if there are others from the group.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. I will make sure that our public comment option on our interactive map gets turned back on. We'll delve right into that, make sure it's available so you can all go in there and leave your comments on the map.
And this presentation, we should contact you if we want it, or
I will put it right on our website so you can download it from our website, as well as the recording of the video.
Okay.
And thank you for bearing with my technology troubles. It's going to be perfect next week when I present it.
It's tough when you all have an audience and you have to do it for the first time. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Of course.